Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be looking at a Carneades.org original entitled The Partial Free Will Argument. This is going to be a response to Plantinga's free will defense, which was in turn a response to The Problem of Evil by J.L. Mackie. So this is going to be part 3. If you haven't checked out The Problem of Evil or the free will defense, you should do that now because they're going to be referenced throughout this video. With that out of the way, let's get started. I'm going to start off this argument with a thought experiment. Imagine you're in a hospital. On one of the beds is Amy, and Amy is in a coma. Amy cannot control her mind or her thoughts. She cannot control her body. She cannot control her environment. She cannot control the actions of anyone around her. It seems to me that Amy does not have free will. She has no ability to make choices. She will never wake up from this coma, so she will never have the ability to make any choices, and so she seems to not be free. Bob is lying in a bed next to Amy, and Bob is completely paralyzed. He can't even move his eyes. Bob can only control his mind and his thoughts. He cannot control his body. He cannot control his environment. He cannot control the actions of anyone around him. It seems that Bob has more free will than Amy, but is still limited in his free will. He can only really control what's going on in his mind. He's never going to become unparalyzed, and so what's going on in his mind will stay in his mind. And while he can make choices about what he thinks about, he can't make choices about what he does. In some way, Bob seems to have more free will than Amy, but still be limited in his free will. Cam is sitting in a bed next to Bob, and Cam is weak and about to die. Cam can control his mind and thoughts. He can control his body. He can control his environment, but only for a short time. He can influence, but not control the actions of anyone around him for a very short time. Cam seems to have more free will than Bob does, but this free will is limited in its scope, in that he may only have 60 seconds to use this free will, and so he can't make choices such as watching the whole of The Lion King. Don is sitting next to Cam, and Don is a prisoner chained to his bed. Don can control his mind and thoughts. He can control his body. He has limited control of his environment. He can influence but not control the actions of anyone around him. It seems that Don and Cam both have more free will than Bob, for example, but are still in some way limited in the free will they have. Don can't get up and move around out of his bed. He can't make choices in that physical realm, and Cam can't do things in a temporal sense that would last longer than the next 60 seconds or so. Ed is also in this hospital room, and Ed is a normal human being, probably visiting a sick relative. Ed can control his mind and thoughts. He can control his body. He can control his environment, and he can influence but not control the actions of anyone around him. Ed seems to have more free will, in effect, more choices that he could make than either Cam or Don, and definitely more choices than Bob or Amy. So Ed seems to have more free will than anyone who's come before him. However, also in this hospital room is Faye, and Faye is a free angel. She can control her mind and thoughts. She can control her body. She can control her environment. She has limited control of the actions of anyone around her. And she can even save Cam's life. Faye has more freedom than Ed does. She can do more things than he could. She has more free will. And of course, in the room also is God, and God is all-powerful. God can control his mind and thoughts. He can control his body. He can control his environment. He has complete control over the actions of anyone around him, and he can do anything that's not a logical contradiction. Why? Because he's omnipotent. It seems that God has more free will than Faye, but certainly God has more free will than Bob. So it seems that each person has more free will than the last, and the most important takeaway from this thought experiment is that free will lies on a spectrum. You can have more or less free will than someone else. So we're going to define partial free will as the ability to choose some things freely but not others. It's somewhere between a completely determined life and omnipotence. If you have partial free will, you're somewhere in the middle. God did give us partial free will then, following from Plantinga's argument, because he gave us the amount of freedom that would maximize the good in the world. He didn't give us omnipotence because that would supposedly have caused some problems and it wouldn't have maximized the good. It wouldn't have been the best of all possible worlds. So, what does this mean? Taking Plantinga's conclusion and what we've just understood about partial free will, what can we conclude? God could have created a world where we are free in all other things, but it's impossible to kill. That doesn't seem to be a logical contradiction, so it's possible for God to have created such a world. It's not a logical contradiction because simply limiting free will, as God in fact did, is not destroying free will and therefore not destroying the good of it. However, the freedom to be able to kill was better than a world where killing is impossible. Or at least it must have been, because God chose the world that exists where killing is possible over a world where killing was impossible. God could have created a world where we are free in all things, we are free in now, but we could bring people back from the dead. However, such a world with the freedom to be able to resurrect was worse than a world where humans cannot resurrect each other. Similarly to the earlier point, if having more freedom would have made the world better, God would have given it to us. So, it must be the case that, in fact, having more freedom would have made the world worse, and having the ability to resurrect people would have made the world worse. Up to this point, you could still completely hold to theism and the free will defense, and hold completely rational, and not really draw too many weird conclusions. Therefore, I'm going to offer 3 arguments, which will show that the consequences of Plantinga's argument are unsustainable for anyone who wants to be a rational member of society. Let's see. God did not give us the maximum amount of free will possible. There are many things we cannot do. We're not omnipotent, and from our thought experiment, this seems to be the case. God can give us limited free will without destroying the good of free will. This seems to follow from the first premise and from Plantinga's original argument. A world where killing is impossible would limit but not destroy our free will and would not create a contradiction. If you can provide an argument to why making killing impossible would create a contradiction, you might be able to wedge your way in here, but I don't think that's the case, because it's possible to create a world where killing with your mind is impossible, so it seems possible to create a world where just killing is impossible. God could have created a world where we were as free as we are now, but killing was impossible. Without destroying our free will, he would only be limiting it, not destroying it, or creating a contradiction. Up to this point, once again, you haven't had any true reason to get rid of your belief in Plantinga's free will defense. However, in order to hold to the free will defense, you have to deny premise 5. A world without killing is better than one with killing. If you as the theist are willing to say that a world with killing is better than one without, you can hold to Plantinga's argument. But if you assent to premise 5 and you want to hold on to Plantinga's argument, you have to conclude the conclusion of the problem of evil, which is that God is either powerless to create such a world, does not know that such a world exists, or is not good. If that wasn't convincing, here's a couple more. God chose to give us exactly the amount of freedom we have now because any more or less would lead to a worse world. Humans with more or less freedom than God gave us would create a worse world. And we should eliminate things that make for a worse world. The first 2 premises seem to follow from our understanding of partial free will and Plantinga's argument, and the third premise seems to be fairly common sense. If you want to argue with that, that's another discussion. Prisons limit humans' freedom, therefore we should eliminate prisons. Science expands humans' freedom, we should eliminate science. If you disagree with 4, remember back to our original thought experiment and Dawn chained to a bed. And if you disagree with 6, go watch some videos about people going up to the moon, or whatnot. Finally, if that wasn't convincing, I'm going to offer a third and final argument from partial free will to understand why Plantinga's free will defense is ineffective. If God had have wanted murderers locked up, he would have made it so they would lose their free will after committing a murder. Murderers do not in fact lose their free will after committing a murder. Therefore, God does not want murderers locked up. He does not want murderers to have any impediments put on their free will, because if he did, and that was a better world, he would have made it so. Because he did not make it so, we should not put people who commit murders in prison. This was a Carneades.org original, so if you have any criticisms or comments or thoughts, please offer them below as always, as I'm always trying to expand and better create arguments here. Check out this video and more at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.